Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and thanks for spending part of it with me. I'm Greg Swartz. I'm the director of the Water of Life. This is Big Man Dram. I'm the big man. Here's the Dram. And thank you for joining me live this Friday and every Friday. This is like I've said this many times, but this started off as something we were going to do a little while, and it just sort of I grew to really like it. So now we've been doing it, and it's really kind of become something I look forward to every week. And I really look forward to spending some time with you and our guests. And this week, our guest is Jason C. from Mash and Drum. And so without further ado, I'm going to add him to the mix. Maybe I'm not. There we go. Hello, Jason.
What's up, Greg? How you doing, man?
Very well. How are you?
Doing really good.
I purposely avoided saying your last name because I don't want to say it wrong. Is it Callori?
You got it. Nailed it.
All right.
Yep.
Awesome. First of all, thank you very much for joining me on a Friday. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's my honor to be here. So absolutely.
In case people are wondering, next week, next Wednesday, I'm going to be joining Jason along with Erica Beindorf from the Brooklotti Distillery. And we're going to be talking a little whiskey, maybe watching a little movie after the fact. And going from there. It's interesting, Jason. One of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is, I think probably maybe starting with Ralphie.
Yeah.
There's been this generation of this next generation of kind of whiskey evangelists, and a lot of our film revolves around Jim McEwen sort of being one of the original whiskey evangelists. But, those guys are analog whiskey evangelists. And now there's this sort of new generation of digital guys doing it. And I guess you could argue that's what we're doing right now. But you're obviously doing it on a much bigger level than I am doing it on. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, your thoughts on that and how you got into it and the tech side of it.
I think basically for me, we were just talking earlier before we went live, how I grew up in New York. Got into whiskey seriously around maybe 2012, 2013, started really drinking, really got into bourbon off the bat. That was kind of my first foray into American whiskey and just whiskey in general. I drank your usual, Jack and Coke, Turkey 101 and Coke in college, but never really expanded my curiosity beyond that. A little later on, a friend of mine was kind of getting into bourbon a little bit. He's like, have you ever tried Wild Turkey 101, just neat or on the rocks or stuff like that? So we started drinking it a little bit more, and we started getting into other spirits, other bourbons, other American whiskeys, ryes, what have you. Then we went to a bar one night, and this amazing bartender, she gave us, she's like, if you guys really want to try bourbon, have you ever tried Booker's bourbon? And at the time, I had never had anything cask strength, non-chill filtered, foolproof, kick your ass, bourbon like that, or anything for that matter, that was cask strength. So, she poured us a glass and we tried some, and my mind was blown. And I'm like, this is so flavorful and so much different than anything I've ever tried. I'm like, I want to learn more. So, I just kept trying stuff as I went along. And then, lo and behold, I moved from New York to here in Columbus, Ohio. I didn't know anybody here. All my friends were back in New York, my family. And I kind of immersed myself into bourbon world and whiskey world and learning as much as I could. And then on top of that, I discovered, just like you said, this whole world of YouTube and whiskey reviews and YouTube reviews. And I really latched on to a few channels, and some of those channels, Scotch Test Dummies, Scotch for Dummies, It's Bourbon Night, and even, Aquavite, Roy out in Scotland. I mean, those guys really not only opened my eyes up to more bourbon, but also Scotch. And I just started immersing myself in all of it. And I wanted to, the one thing I really kind of noticed throughout YouTube is there wasn't really anyone talking about the history and the people who make it and getting really nerdy about it. And that's kind of where I wanted to live. I felt like that could be my niche into, creating something on YouTube. I had the background editing skills. I had the graphic design skills. I went to school for graphic design and marketing. So I kind of had that background. I learned editing at a previous job using Sony Vegas and iMovie and a bunch of other different platforms. So I figured, why not? Let's try to make a few videos, and lo and behold, almost 3 years later, it's Mash and Drum has become, more than I ever thought it would. So it's been an honor.
That's cool. That's great. And I feel like there's something about whiskey, no matter what your entry, no matter what door you go through, every room has doors that'll take you wind up in Irish whiskey or Scotch or Japanese whiskey or Australian whiskey, or there's just so many. One leads to another, leads to another, and eventually it's going to take you to another country.
Yeah. It's kind of the never-ending rabbit hole.
Yeah.
If you will. And it transcends, whiskey, I feel like transcends most, not only people from different backgrounds, but whiskey just has a way of bringing people together. I've never really realized that more than with this whole YouTube and WhiskeyTube movement, because we have people that watch every week, that watch my channel every week, watch other channels every week. It's this very, very super close-knit family that is always in the chat, talking it up, and it's pretty amazing.
It's funny because one of the things that I noticed too is, like, I'll watch Aquavite, and then I'll see people comment in the chat that says, "I was just watching Ralphie, and he says this," and like sort of the chats kind of carry over from one to another, and even that has become a network of.
I mean, and we all have our own, I guess, kind of core viewers, but there's a lot of crossover there too, which is something that's amazing. I crossed over with Aquavite a couple times, and he sent me. I'm proud to say I got an 8 out of 10 on his blind challenge, which was a lot of fun. Those are always very scary from Roy. So that was a fun video to make, and I feel like I got some maybe some more Scotch viewers from that, and people that watch me, they know my affinity for Bunnahabhain and Brooklotti, Talisker, and some of those big famed distilleries. So
you like the West Coast stuff, huh? Not just the Isla, but the Talisker as well. You like
I love the coastal stuff. It took me a little while to get used to it. I was very, and Roy from Aquavita, he's always obsessed with this video that I did. It was my first taste of a peated Isla, and it was Lagavulin 8-year. And I had never experienced a peated. So I did this whole series, just trying some scotches throughout the month. And I was kind of building myself up. I got a lot of input from a lot of other channels. Like, where do I start? Where do I go? So it worked my way up from Monkey Shoulder to Glenfiddich to Macallan to Glendronach, up into Highland Park, getting into Talisker, and then, slowly building up to, sherry bombs, stuff that has a little bit more, a mix of just ex-bourbon and ex-sherry, some that are just ex-bourbon, Deanstons, stuff like that. So as I kind of worked my way up, I'm like, all right, I'm ready for an Isla. I jumped into Lagavulin 8, and Roy always loves my reaction when I first tasted it, because I had never tried anything like that. And it was an absolute, like, just a monster of flavor that attacked my palate. and I never really. And then, honestly, as much as maybe it kind of put me off at first, the more I drank it, the more these evolved flavors and these sweet flavors just kept kind of, popping out of the smoke. And I'm like, wow, this is actually way more layered than I thought it would be. And then as you get to the higher aged Islas, and the smoke gets a little bit more rounded in flavor, and more of those the barrel influences come through, especially if it's sherried. I mean, incredible stuff. And that kind of really launched me into getting into the smokier side of scotches, for sure.
Speaking of which, before we go too far down the rabbit hole, we were both of us are drinking. We coordinated together and decided we were going to drink some Port Charlotte today. I'm drinking the 10-year-old.
You got the 10. So I actually just cracked this open last weekend. This is the MC01.
There you go.
Yeah. MC01 2009. This is a Port Charlotte, heavily peated, from finished in Marsala. So
nice. I had that last year once, and It's great. There's something I love. Speaking of smoky whiskeys, I love smoky whiskeys, and I love smoky whiskeys that have a little red wine influence. That have that little. There's something about it that I did a video the other day about Ardbeg NO, and I know because I know people look down their nose at that as like the beginner Ardbeg, but I love that, and I love Port Charlotte's.
Yeah, Port Charlotte to me was. I did an interesting head-to-head between Port Charlotte 10-year and Ardbeg 10-year. And I actually liked a little bit more of the nuance of Port Charlotte over the Ardbeg. I mean, it won just by a hair. Because the Ardbeg 10 is an absolutely fantastic whiskey,
totally
well, especially for the price. My favorite Ardbeg is actually Korvyekin. What do you think of that one?
I like it. I like it a lot.
Like from the core range, I mean.
Right. Yeah. No, I like it a lot. And I know that people... I think if you just took a blind poll of people, my guess is in the Ardbeg core people, Uigeadail is going to win.
Yeah, I had a lot of people tell me Uigeadail, but I don't know. Uigeadail's delicious. I just feel like it doesn't have it's just a little bit more refined and rounded around the edges, and I like the punch and the attacking flavors that Korvyekin has over the Uigeadail. But the Uigeadail is delicious.
People may have heard me say this before. I know you're into the history of whiskey, so you may know this. But when Mark Renier and Simon Coughlin and their group set out to buy a distillery, and Jim Beam Brands would not sell them Brooklotti for so many years, they tried to buy Ardbeg, and they got outbid by Glenmorangie.
Oh, really? I didn't know
they
that.
went back to trying to buy Brooklotti, and we did an event the other week, and Simon Coughlin said in the event, he said, "Thank God it didn't work out." And he said, I don't mean that as a disparagement to Ardbeg at all, but he said, we knew we wanted to do really, really experimental things. And the Ardbeg spirit is so distinctly itself. It's not as flexible as the spirit at the core of Brooklotti whiskey. Ardbegs are all Ardbegs. I mean, they're instantly, clearly Ardbegs. And you were never going to be able to completely reinvent them in whole new, an Octomore versus a micro Provenance Brooklotti in a sherry cask for 17, it just wasn't going to give you that bend. So I thought that was an interesting little tidbit.
I thought I've been really lucky enough recently to try some really old Ardbeg, some 22-year Ardbeg. It's amazing how Ardbeg really just changes over years of maturation. They have the new Ardbeg 25, which actually came out recently. It's actually here in Ohio, I think, in a couple places. It was available for like $850 or something like that. 25-year Ardbeg at 46% ABV.
I've had the 22, but I've not had the 25.
Yeah, the 25 is fairly new. The 22 I thought was a phenomenal, maybe one of the best Ardbegs I've ever had, aside from the Dark Cove committee release, which I'm lucky enough to have a bottle of, and I sip that whiskey very slowly.
So I see here that Donner Pass Whiskies made a couple comments, and I wanted to share that. And I don't know if you know who this person is, because I don't.
Yeah. Donner is a great viewer of my channel, so he's
awesome. Cool. That's what I was assuming.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that I have had and love the MRC. I have a whiskey that some of my friends joke is, I call it my dream whiskey, which is a Port Charlotte Valinch. They did it with an MNC, which is a Chateau Côtier de Nîmes, which I don't know enough about French wine to know much about it. But every time I've ever had a dram of that whiskey, I dream about that dram that night. So it has some kind of deep lizard brain connection for me. And I was going to bring it out today, but it's cask strength and it's 1 o'clock here. So I decided to go with the relatively anemic 50% ABV of the 10-year-old.
So let me ask you a quick question. You directed Water of Life. How much experience with whiskey, or what was kind of the driving force for you to make that film? Because, I would imagine to do that kind of a film, you not only have to really be passionate about whiskey, and also filmmaking, but have, I guess, some historical context into what you like to drink. So I was just kind of wondering, what kind of kicked that off.
Well, it's a couple of. I think it's 3 different roads in my life that all kind of crossed over at the right time. Which is, for the last 20 years, I've been a professional full-time filmmaker. And so, that's my day job as well. And that's what, I do commercials, corporate video, all kinds of different stuff. I've done other feature, a lot of short form. This is my first feature documentary. But when I was in college, I spent a year as an exchange student in Glasgow. And that's when I discovered whiskey for the first time. But at that point, it was only as a consumer. It was frankly as a 19-year-old consumer. So it was more volume based.
Okay.
So I started drinking whiskey back then, but always kept it around, but never immersed myself. And then 3 years ago, my wife and I, it was our 10th anniversary. We went to Scotland. She'd never been. And we went to Dufton and we did the Dufton Whiskey Walk, which is a walking tour of the distilleries of Dufton, which, by the way, anytime I mention, I highly recommend it to anyone. It's awesome. It's a great hike. You don't even go into the distilleries because it's not official. You actually drink drams in the parking lots outside of them. And she tells you stories and gives you chocolates and cheeses and stuff along with each dram. It's really fun.
That's cool.
And then she puts you in a van and drives you home because you've had 9 drams. And during that, they actually had the roof off of Glenfiddich and they were putting in new stills. And I started really kind of pondering the process while I was looking. I have a photo of it actually that I took of my wife and the rest of the tour looking down into the now still house with no roof on it, and it just really blew me away. And it got my mind kind of spinning about the people who make it, as opposed to the stills are interesting and they're interesting to look at. But to me, the story immediately was about the people who make it and how it has changed or has not changed in hundreds of years.
And I love looking at different pot stills, and especially there's something very romantic about pot stills. I don't know what it is about it, but they all have their very unique, look, make, and feel. And, it's almost like a sports car. You just kind of just look at it and really kind of take in the different nuances of it. And, Brooklotti having really tall stills to get that really nice slow maturation, that really slow distillation. It's really unique.
And it's funny. My favorite stills from an aesthetic standpoint, my favorite stills I've ever seen were in Glenfarclas. We were in Glenfarclas. And one of the things I loved about it was just that, first of all, they still have direct fire stills. And the other thing was that they were so committed to the stills they had that they had patched them with, rather than replace them, there's patches kind of welded onto the stills here and there. And then when they do replace the stills, they replace the patch. The new still, they'll actually put a hole in, or at least that's what they told us, and they'll put a patch where the other one was because they assume every little detail matters.
So they feel like that still allows them to give them some consistency.
Yeah.
That's really, that's crazy. It's like, we got a brand new still. Let's pop a hole in it and patch it.
Right, exactly.
That's crazy.
And they had the control board for their stills was it looked like a set from like one of the earliest James Bond movies. It's all like early NASA, like Mercury astronauts,
like analog looking.
Analog with those big kind of quarter size LED, or not, they're not LEDs, they're regular lights that are, that are like, and there's diagrams. It's really great. And it wasn't like retro kitsch. It was just retro. It was just still
stuff like that's fascinating. You see that in the bourbon world too. The bourbon world has, there's a lot of new distilleries now that have modernized, and I mean they have full, control panels that look like you're at a NASA, control room with screens everywhere telling you exact temperatures, telling you, exactly what part of the fermentation process is happening in each mash tun. It's incredible. But then you have some, distilleries still doing old school where it's, some of it's by touch and feel and just by smell. And exactly the distiller knows when it's ready, when it's not ready. And I always find that. And when you even go back to, you go back 1700s when whiskey was first started to be crafted, here and there. Even like, the early monks, like how they knew it was ready and how they knew it was done. And you always wonder, it's like, did they just wait for that shit to turn to alcohol and they just start drinking it like right away? Or did they feel like, let's let it age and see what happens?
Yeah. And then they discovered that the stuff that they hadn't gotten around to for 6 months tasted better than the stuff they drank right off the still.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So,
one of the stories that Gordon and MacPhail, when we were there, they told us that, they started really getting into barrel aging when it wasn't a required thing because they were importing so many groceries from mainland Europe and they would come in barrels. And so they had these barrels. So they put the whiskey in there, put the spirit in there. And they quickly noticed that it tasted better than the ones that they were, when they would buy it from farmers and sell it the next day.
Oh, that's crazy.
And
what were they storing in these barrels, though?
Well, they would buy. Well, that's where apparently that is where sherry cask whiskey came from. They would import sherry in a cask, sell the sherry, and then have the cask. But they said they have records of storing whiskey in a cask that had held mackerel, big fail. A cask that had held, I believe, bolts. Before there was like ready-made cardboard, so that it would a cask came full of bolts or nuts or screws or some sort of hardware.
Yeah, fish. Yeah. Alphonse Palema in the chat said fish.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the stories from bourbon as well. That in order to, the story goes is that Elijah Craig, who was who had some fish and pickles and some other stuff that was stored in barrels, in order to get rid of that stench, he lit his barrels on fire. He charred them to get rid of that smell. Yeah. And then he would store his whiskey in it. And then he would drive his barrels on in town and by horse and carriage. And lo and behold, when he got to town, all of a sudden his bourbon had a different color to it and a different flavor. So, I mean, there's a lot of stories on how bourbon started, but that's one of the more famous ones.
There's a guy that we met in Scotland named Colin McKenzie. Mm-hmm. He sometimes watches this. If he is, I hope he'll say something. But Colin collects antique whiskey bottles.
Nice.
And barrels and things. And he's showed us his collection. And he has these little things. They're smaller than quarter casks. I mean, they're probably like a gallon, maybe 2 gallons.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he basically said what they would do is they were sort of illicit barrels to be taken from the Highlands, from the Cabrach down into Edinburgh. And they would get shepherds who had horses to strap them underneath the horse so that you couldn't see from a distance that it was there. It was small enough and it wasn't heavy enough to hurt the horse, so they could hide it. So they basically would march the sheep to market. And while they were there, they had, a couple of little small casks that they would just illicitly sell.
Oh, man, that's fascinating.
And he owns these things now, like these old casks.
Oh, he has these old little.
Yeah.
Like eighth casks, I guess.
I guess, yeah. I think they're 2 gallons. I'm sure Alphonse, who's been commenting here, he is one of our producers and a photographer, and he probably has photos of them somewhere. Because when Colin gave us the tour, we took some photos of them. Sure.
Yeah.
It's funny. One of the first events we did online here when we started rolling the film out, someone asked us, does Brooklotti still have the Victorian era equipment on display, like in a museum? Mm-hmm. And it gave me great delight to say, oh no, they're using it. This isn't a decoration. This is still very much in use. And someone at the distillery told us the only major technological upgrade they made on the distillation side was that the grist mill used to be powered by a donkey walking in a circle. And the donkey has been retired.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, I mean, so Brooklotti had a fire in, 1930? What was the fire? 1932, 33, 34, something like that?
Yes. Yeah, it was in the 30s. Maybe Erica. I know Erica's watching here, so maybe she'll know. Yeah, I don't know the year, but close.
I want to say it's 33 or 34, but that's when they had the big fire at Brooklotti, and then, obviously it shut down, eventually not too long after that. And then it was brought back, about 2000, they started distilling again?
They bought it in December of 2000 and started distilling in May. Just last week was the 20th anniversary, May 29th.
Yeah. I mean, I remember from what I read is how the entire distillery itself was just reassembled. And also reassembled in a way where they're trying to keep the heritage of the old distillery, but somewhat, with new parts, but still mixing the modern with the old way of doing things. And I think that to me was completely fascinating.
Well, Alan Logan told us that they benefited from, in retrospect, from being neglected so long. Because if the distillery, who had ever owned them before, if they had taken them seriously, bit by bit, they would have replaced the still or replaced the swan neck or replaced the line arm or replaced the mash tun. But because they were so neglected, all of the original equipment stayed, the main pieces, obviously. And, that they came to benefit from that because it would have gotten removed bit by bit over the decades.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the the preview video for Water of Life is when it gets to the part where they're talking about how Jim McEwan was just kept bringing out. It seemed like there was a new release every other day, every other week, and the owner's like, "Dude, like, what are you doing? Like, how are we doing this?" He's like, "Because we can, and because it's fun." And I'm like, "Wow, to live on that island like that in that time frame when Jim McEwan was just pumping out different releases each and every week. Oh my God! If I knew then what I knew now, I'd be in Isla like every summer, just gathering up bottles. My goodness."
Yeah. You know, it's funny because I've become fond of saying this in different situations now, but when it dawned on me, it really I didn't even think of this till after we were done with the film, but
yeah,
it's easy to forget because Jim is such a charismatic guy and a funny guy and a good storyteller. It's easy to forget that he's a genius craftsman. If he were mute and never said a word to anyone and was a recluse, he'd still be a genius whiskey maker. Like, it's a whole different thing altogether, you know, and you forget it. And it's, it's an interesting dynamic.
I like always his his like stature as a maverick and what he's done in whiskey. I just think, and Erica, you're right. Jim is the king of storytelling. So speaking of Roy at Aquavita, he had Jim McEwan on a few weeks ago on the channel, which was fascinating to listen to him just talk and tell some of those stories. It's to see his, and I can't wait to see the whole film because I can only imagine you just filming him. There had to be some level of inspiration there, correct?
It's sure. The film changed as we shot it, I mean, even from a numeric standpoint, like people, I would have loved Rachel Berry's in our film. I would have loved to have more Rachel Berry in our film. But the difference is Rachel Berry was available to us for 4 hours. We had 8 days with Jim. It was a whole different experience. Like where we followed him. I mean, Alphonse and I followed him all over Scotland, all over Isla. Went to Germany with him twice. Went to Australia with him. I mean, we followed him around the world.
When you're walking around. When you're walking around Isla with Jim McEwan, I mean, what is that like? Do people just follow him like the Pied Piper?
No, I mean, I think people. I mean, I think it's very, very Scottish Highland to not. They'd go out of their way not to make a big deal. But I mean, we in fairness, we were shooting there in November, so Isla was pretty empty. We wanted that on purpose. We weren't in the middle of the festival. We did go and shoot at the festival, but not with Jim.
Okay.
And then most of the stuff we did with him was either in private or we went on hikes with him out in the, far reaches of the island where there was no one. But we did shoot a lot with him in the middle of Bamor, and a couple people poked their heads out and looked, it's.
Yeah, I mean, he worked at Bamor when he was like 15 years old. He started at Bamor, right? Something like that, something crazy. I mean, his knowledge. There you go.
So so Donner Pass. You're talking about the Artisan restaurant in Wishaw. With that owner. And Derek, the chef and owner there, Derek has more Brooklotti expressions than the distillery does. They've one of the guys at the distillery, Fraser, did some research and found out that I think there's 3 blood tubs that they released in Indiana, in the U.S., that the distillery no longer has bottles of, and Derek does.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So I got to ask you, while you were filming this, what did you get to try any really rare and old Brooklottis?
Yeah.
I can't say what, but they were.
Well, it's funny.
I just kind of saw your eyes roll in the back of your head.
When we were doing it, Adam Hannett was teasing us, and he said, "Here, you can't brag about this whiskey because it doesn't have a name. It's never been released, and it never will get released."
Yeah.
And I said to him at the time, and I'm proving it right now, you underestimate my ability to brag about this whiskey. We have a bottle of Jim gave us each some of his Diana cask, and I still have a little tiny bit of it that we decided we would drink it when the film was done. But then my birthday was 2 months ago, and Trevor, our producer, poured drams of it for my birthday. Surprised me with it. So that was pretty cool.
So do you have an age on that? Like, what is that? What's that whiskey?
Well, it's still, to the best of my knowledge, it is still in the cask. But when we drank it, it was 28 years old.
Oh,
and
my heart just skipped a beat a little bit.
If you when you get to see the film, there's a scene in the film near the end where Jim and Adam are pulling cask samples, and that's the cask.
That's the cask.
Yeah. And Jim says, I'm loath to drink it. And Adam says, well, that's what it's for, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's freaking amazing. And the fact that you have a little bit left is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I never know what to do with it. Like you have this idea in your mind of the special occasion, and I never know, what's going to be special enough. But it doesn't, hey, I'm not complaining.
Well, yeah, to keep things cheesy, I always feel like the best time to open something is when you're in just, good company.
Yeah.
You could sit down and actually enjoy the whiskey and talk about it and, be amongst family, friends, whoever it may be, even, your coworkers, you got
totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have, 2 weeks ago, Brooklotti had the open day, and they had the time travelers theme, and they had the tasting kits, and I have the tasting kit here. I bought one, and it's still sitting here because my allergies were so bad that week. My palate was shot, and I wasn't going to blow it by drinking some of the rarest whiskeys I'm ever going to drink, and I may as well have just been drinking mouthwash. I couldn't, taste anything. So I still haven't sat down and rewatched the masterclass and drunk them, but I will, maybe this weekend, actually.
Yeah, man. I hope you do. I mean, get in there. I would have been drinking them on the plane if I could.
We did this thing. Hold on 1 second. Let me grab it. It's right over here.
Oh yeah, let me see this thing.
This is a thing we did. It's not a sale. This isn't a sales pitch because these are very much long sold out. But
yeah, I'm sure.
We created this thing that was Jim's career in dram form, and we basically got 6 different whiskeys that were. What they are is Jim's Australian whiskey he just made. It hasn't been released yet. We got the Brooklotti, pre-mothballing Brooklotti, the Resurrection Dram.
Pre-mothballing, okay.
Yeah. A 20-year-old Bowmore, and then 2 of Jim's casks that he sold to from his personal cask selection that he just sold to Dram Full, which was a Brooklotti Isla Barley in a Banyule cask, and then a Loch and Dal, which I have a particular fondness for. There was and so that was super fun to taste these in sequence and sort of go through time, with
it's almost, it's like sipping his journey almost. That's crazy.
Yeah. We've gotten pretty nerdy about this, but I've enjoyed the process.
Well, that's kind of my wheelhouse, trying to get a little nerdy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's fun to do it with other people, and sort of swap notes about not just the tasting, but the history and all that. And let me ask you a question. Have you read Charles MacLean's The Secret History of Scotland?
No, I have not.
Well, unfortunately, I believe it's out of print, which Charlie himself told me was because they took the word whiskey out of the title of the book. So it sounds like a history book, and it is, but it's about the history of whiskey. But the word whiskey doesn't appear in the title.
Okay.
It is about the history of illicit distilling in Scotland.
Really? Okay.
It's really cool. It's a cool book.
That'd be something I'd want to read. Definitely.
Yeah, I was looking for it. I have it around here somewhere, but like I said, I think it's out of print. I
always have some. I always have books on hand here that I like to read. This is the Bourbon Bible, which kind of takes you through the whole history of that, quickly.
Nice.
And this one's a really interesting book that I love to read. It's called Bourbon Justice. This is from Brian Harrah, and to keep it short, it's basically a history on how every bourbon and American whiskey maker tried to sue the shit out of each other, at every corner whenever they could, all the way back from the early 1900s, just suing each other left and right. I mean, it didn't even. And it could be over the most simple and little thing, but that book just takes you on a whole story of how all these lawsuits, patent law, label laws, how it's all shaped a lot of the laws that we know today. So it's a pretty incredible kind of like a biopic on all, those different laws and
cool.
Yeah, like it gets into like Maker's Mark, suing over their red wax, and Ezra Brooks and Jack Daniels having very, very, very similar labels, which is pretty interesting. Then ultimately Ezra Brooks got to keep the look of their label because they deemed that it was different enough, even though it was clearly trying to mimic the Jack Daniels label. So,
well, I found the book. It's right here.
Oh yeah, look at that. Scotland's Secret History.
Yeah, and the subtitle is The Illicit Distilling and Smuggling of Whiskey. But
all right, smuggling. That's what I like to.
See, this is cool. Super nerd. You can see my Post-it notes.
Man, you got notes, man. That's awesome. Yeah, that's what I did in the Bourbon Justice book. I was writing like notes on the like near the binder. I was just kind of like writing little notes.
There's a Dave Broom and Arthur Motley have a YouTube channel that they did called Liquid Antiquarian.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very deep dive whiskey nerd, or not even just whiskey and spirits nerd, where they'll find one document each week and then talk about it for an hour about what it meant and how. And it's funny. This one's really funny. One of the excise laws that they passed in the 1800s, maybe 80 or 81, but I think it's earlier than that. It's a list of what you cannot do at your distillery, but they were cracking up laughing because the reason it's so funny is it reads like an instruction manual of how to build a distillery, but it just has "do not do this" in front of every category. It's like, you will not build a mash tun of this many gallons. You will not use a line arm longer than this or shorter than this. You will not do, and if you just take the will not out of it, it literally is a perfect instruction manual for how to build a distillery.
How to build a distillery. That's awesome. Well, have you ever seen the document, the Irish whiskey one?
No. I don't know. The one about the green malts and
no, it's the Irish whiskey. Oh man, what the hell is it called? It's gonna drive me nuts. It's like this long document on exactly how to make Irish whiskey and all the steps that go into it. It's the technical file. That's what it's called.
Huh.
The Irish whiskey technical file. And you really want to get deep dive into, nerdy whiskey stuff. I mean, this technical file goes into every little aspect and facet of how to make, distill, and produce Irish whiskey. And I mean, it takes you through malted barley, unmalted barley, using finishes, stills, everything. It's a little bit wordy, and you can kind of start just getting bored by all the terms they use. But if you kind of power through it, it's pretty interesting.
That sounds like it's right up my.
Yeah, and you can find. You can find if you look up Irish whiskey technical file. You can easily find it online. Yeah,
I absolutely will. Probably as soon as we're done with this. It's interesting. I want to loop back to one thing we talked about at the very beginning, because I know that you did not begin doing what you do because of the pandemic, but has your audience gotten more and more engaged and bigger because this is how people.
Absolutely. During the pandemic, there was a call for more. There was a call for more content.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because people were home and they were able to watch more. There was a call for more crossover streaming and collaboration between different whiskey channels and big collaborations too. I'm not just talking one or two channels. I was on collaborations where we had 13, 14 channels on at once. It was crazy. But absolutely, I think the pandemic played a huge role in not only the growth of just my channel, but a lot of channels that were out there. A lot of channels started during the pandemic.
Sure.
I started my channel at an interesting point a couple of years ago, almost 3 years ago now. It'll be the end of July will be my 3-year anniversary for my channel. So, you had all the, we talked about Roy, we talked about Scotch Test Dummies, Scotch 4 Dummies, it's Bourbon Night. Even, the Whiskey Tribe guys, Daniel and Rex, those were kind of the stalwarts. Well, and also Ralphie was always there. So you had those stalwart channels that, I was watching, and then there was a couple of other smaller channels, and then I started mine. I kind of just figured, let me get into it now. And then I feel like maybe 5-6 months after me, there was another huge influx of channels. And then during the pandemic, that grew exponentially.
Yeah.
To the point where it felt like a new channel was coming out every single week. And the trick with that is, I think people, like you said, during the pandemic, you're kind of sitting down, you recognize this amazing community that, there is a lot of support and a lot of love and a lot of camaraderie within it. And I felt like, maybe that's just like a good outlet for people just to, talk and right. Talk whiskey and have something that resonates with everybody and have that community besides just, being home and kind of shut down inside. So, yeah, I think there was, and now it's kind of the opposite, because now things are starting to open up again, and it's also summertime. So, and that's when usually you see the viewership and everything get a little bit lower because everyone's kind of busy doing stuff. Sure. And last year we didn't have that issue. Last year it was just constant viewership because people wanted more content. So,
and I think, in my experience, Zoom isn't ever going to replace reality. But the good thing is with whiskey, if the conversation's good and the whiskey's good, the technology can disappear for a while.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm really talking to you. I'm not pretending to talk to you. I'm really talking to you right now.
Yeah, like we're having an absolute and that's the thing. When we were having all these conversations with new channels, old channels, crossovers, we all feel like we knew each other for a long. And I finally got to meet Roy and Scotch Test Dummies and Bill over at the Whiskey Dictionary and just a bunch of other channels, the year before the pandemic in Texas. And it's almost just like you pick up right where you're left off. It's like, it's nice that you meet them in person, but you always just feel like you knew them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just one of those crazy, weird things, but you realize why it's all about the whiskey and everybody coming together. Because at the end of the day, it's always about what's in the glass and what actually brought us all together.
Yeah. We have an interesting comment based on what we were talking about. Okay, I'll read it. But from what I understand, the stuff they were making in the Highland Speyside was so good, the blenders all wanted it, so it needed to be legitimized. But the distillers weren't ready to go legal right away. And a big part of it, from what I've learned from reading that book and some 2 other books, is early on there was a huge couple of families that really kind of controlled the whiskey production in Glasgow. The Steen family were like the first giant family of whiskey, and they certainly didn't want competition coming from little farmers here and there, and so they basically lobbied and got laws written in such a way where they paid a much lower tax rate on big distilleries than they did on small distilleries, which frankly maybe isn't all that different than it is today, but they have one of the things that you have is like families like Gordon and MacPhail, they were grocers and they've been doing it ever since and never stopped doing it. And did you get to go there when you were there in Scotland? Did you get to go to?
No, I actually haven't been. I haven't been out to Scotland yet.
Oh. Well, you got to go.
It's definitely in my plans. I plan on bringing a couple extra suitcases to bring home whiskey.
Well, so the interesting thing is you have like Dewar's or Johnny Walker. They were grocery stores.
Yeah. Same thing with the whatchamacallit, the guys that make Green Spot, Yellow Spot.
Yeah, Mitchell and Sons.
Mitchell and Sons. Oh, they were grocers. So.
But the unique thing about Gordon and MacPhail is they still are. It's literally still a grocery store. You go in this normal small town grocery store and you walk through, and here's canned soups and here's drinks, and over here there's a deli bar where you can get a sandwich and cheese, and then you go through this door in the back and you're in like the world's most unbelievable whiskey shop. It's just sort of one room within this grocery store.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some bologna. I'm gonna get some salami. We get some bread, and then we're going to buy a 35-year-old single pack. Yeah,
exactly.
And that would probably be my exact list too, by the way. Salami, some cheese, and I go buy a 35-year-old Scotch.
Yeah, that's I think my wife would recognize my what would happen if I went to the grocery store. You know, the bill would always be 400 pounds more than if she had gone.
Well, of
The
course.
groceries would still be the same, but there'd be one item.
Always a little extra something for you.
So, but they, you know, the idea of like, just not from a tax standpoint and a legality standpoint, but from a consistency standpoint, that, you know, when they started blending, the grocery store became the brand because they would blend them. And
yeah,
I'm just fascinated by that stuff. And that's, you may have heard me say this elsewhere, but you know, we're kind of working on a film about the history of independent bottling. And that's going to be the second film, I think. And it's mostly already shot, but it's just about that sort of unique history of that world.
Yeah, and you know, that's interesting because I feel like the history of that is far more, it goes, you know, back further than even bourbon might with independent bottling. Bourbon nowadays, you see, I mean, there's a new damn freaking label every week sourcing from Barton, Beam, Heaven Hill, every heritage distiller you could think of. And, you know, it just seems every week you see, you know, these new labels coming out, people making blends, people just doing single casks, and they're all, you know, for that independent bottler. You normally don't use that term with bourbon. They usually just say it's a source brand rather than independent bottler, but that essentially that's what it is. It's an independent bottler. You're sourcing casks from other distilleries, you're filling it up and slapping your own label on it and selling it for usually a premium.
This is something I'm going to have to look into more, because that's an interesting point. And I never put these two things together, but two different things you said today were the history of the sort of litigiousness of the bourbon industry with each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that has made that more complicated, you know, because I've asked a lot of these people in Scotland,
yep,
would independent bottling ever become a thing if it were to start today? And they all agree, no way. Because if you're Diageo and you own Kalila, mm-hmm, you're not going to, you might sell casks on, but you would never let the brand be listed. You don't want someone else running around with your brand, you know. And Gordon and MacPhail, they're respected enough, and Cadenheads and stuff are respected enough that they can usually do deals where the brand will be on the bottle because people trust them.
Yeah, I've had some amazing Cadenheads.
But imagine like just two random guys get drunk someday and buy a cask and then slap their name on it, and they have the words Kalila on it, or they have the words Talisker on it. You're going to damage that brand.
Exactly. Because, I mean, you never know what type of cask is going to represent that, you know, actual brand. I mean, it's got to be a good cask, you know?
Yeah.
So, and you know, the same happens with bourbon too. You never know who's blending it, who's putting it together. I mean, we have just a bunch of labels in bourbon today. That's just, I mean, you have all the MGP stuff out of Indiana. Most people are sourcing from there. Barton is huge. Heaven Hill is huge. Even Jim Beam had a 15.5-year bourbon that was out there in plastic totes just sitting around. It was distilled for somebody, but then it was never claimed. And then all of a sudden you saw about 8 to 10 different brands come out with a 15.5-year bourbon that was the same exact mash bill. It was like this weird, like 78.5% corn mash bill. The rest was rye and barley. And you're like, where the hell is all this shit coming from? And then you realize all these brands that have this bourbon that they bought and they sourced and they threw it into their own bottle. The funny thing was it was at all different price points. I mean, Chicken Cock did it, and they were wanted like $250 to $300 for it. Doc Swinson's did it. They charged $120, $130 for it. And that's the thing. I think that's a big part of being educated as a not only a bourbon drinker but a whiskey drinker as to what's out there, what you're getting in the bottle. Because all the story is always the same. This special, handcrafted, super unique bottle is available with this 15.5-year age statement on it. But like, it's really not that unique. You're trying to tell people it's unique, but there's about 6 other brands that have that exact whiskey in the bottle.
Yeah. That's amazing to me. I did not know that. And, you know, one of the things I cannot keep up with bourbon. And the reason I say that is you're right. There seems like there's new brands every week. And a lot of the brands choose their names almost to purposely sound a little bit like other brands' names, you know?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
and the advantage that you get with Scotch is that when a distillery gets announced, you know it's going to be 3 years at least, if not more, until there's a whiskey out. So you kind of get used to it. You're like, oh, Ardbeg, okay, in 2021 they're going to release a whiskey. Whereas I swear every week or two someone asks me about, have you heard of, you know, some brand of whiskey, of bourbon, that I was like, no, I've never even heard of the brand, let alone had it. Like, you know, and they come out so fast, I just can't keep up with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. I mean, I totally agree. The amount of source brands that we're getting, there's guys. Now, there are some source brands that are doing at least different things with the whiskey. I'll show you a brand here. This is one of my favorite brands, Foregate. So this is a really cool bourbon brand. And yeah, it's an expensive bottle. All these releases are usually about $200, but it's a very common thing now for every freaking release that comes out in bourbon to be about $150 to $200. But they're sourcing whiskey, and what they're doing is they're finding very unique casks in order to finish their whiskey in it. So they'll buy 9, 8, 10, 11, 12-year bourbon. That one happens to be a hybrid rum sherry cask. So they found a sherry producer that bought a cask, or a rum producer that bought a sherry cask, threw a bunch of rum in it, aged it for a little while, and then once they emptied it, these casks were just waiting around, and they work with Kelvin Cooperage to source some of these really unique like hybrid casks, and they finish a whiskey in it. Yeah. And all that stuff. There's always a price for all that. It's all built into the price. Finding these casks, paying for the source whiskey, from a broker within Kentucky. Brokers are everywhere now in Kentucky, and you can buy a barrel, you could buy a tote, you could buy a bunch of stuff that you don't really know what you're getting all the time. You take all the risk for it. And your barrel could be half empty. You don't know. All they tell you is where it came from, and if you want it, you could have it. And you're taking all the risk. It's crazy. So on one hand, I give them a lot of it's a lot of risk and a lot of balls to do that. Right. But at the same time, I'm always worrying about the bourbon market, American whiskey, getting just oversaturated with source brands. And I feel like you don't have to do that, especially with the amazing craft distilleries that are coming out. And just like in Scotland, some of the younger distilleries that we're seeing coming out with some amazing stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Speaking of the Kelvin Cooperage, I see we have a question, which I'll bring up in a second. But the Kelvin Cooperage, the Glasgow distillery and the Kelvin Cooperage did a kind of a fun experiment last month. I don't know if you saw this, called the Cooper's Cask. And they got a Cooper. They have their own in-house Cooper in Glasgow, Shug, who's a friend of mine.
Okay.
And then they got one of the owners of the Kelvin Cooperage unfortunately died last year. And Kevin. Yeah. And so he and Shug got together and they made a cask where it was a hogshead, half made out of a cask from Kentucky, an ex-bourbon cask, and half made out of, I think it was a sherry cask in Glasgow. And they literally alternated staves in the cask. And it was released. Yep. And I think they're going to do more of it because I think it sold out in no time. And it was just sort of Cooper nerd.
So Foregate does something similar called a split stave. Well, they alternate staves between an 18-month season stave, and then they have a toasted stave, and and the sequence just goes around the entire barrel in that sequence. So you don't have a full toast, but you have kind of like this extra sweetness kind of overlaid into the whiskey, into the bourbon. Yeah, but I mean, doesn't the Scotch, the Scotch Association, don't they really like keep an eye on? I mean, look what happened with Compass Box in the first iteration of whatchamacallit, of one of my favorites that's up there. The what the hell is the name of that release?
There's a bunch of the ones that are very kind of in your face names. Like this is not a
this is not your whiskey.
This is not a prestigious whiskey or something like
that. They got in trouble for a couple of those. They got in trouble. Extravaganza, that's what it's called. Yeah.
But they got in trouble too. They were putting staves inside a cask, just extra staves throwing in the cask.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to do that. And Spiced. So here, Donner Pass was asking a question about, do you know any of the barrels from the Barton Rickhouse collapse were salvaged?
I mean, some were. I mean, remember when a whole, it was funny when I kind of read about it. They kind of took you through. There was a site that kind of took you through an interesting, I guess, like almost a physics way of explaining how it collapsed, and how the barrels really that are on the bottom are going to be the ones that get crushed because all that weight from up top, and the ones that up top kind of trickled and rolled down. So there were some casks that were salvaged from that. I'm surprised we haven't seen a special release already. Well, with survivor release, something like that.
They got a huge fine from the state, right? Because they poisoned the creek. Because all the whiskey flowed into the creek.
They poisoned the creek. They found a bunch of dead fish. I mean, it was serious. Yep.
The Glenfiddich a few years ago had that whiskey with Snow Phoenix, and it was a roof of one of their warehouses collapsed, and it had some of the oldest whiskey they had in it. And one of the warehousemen went in and rescued like 3 casks before, and that they were, of course, they released. I hope they gave the premium money from that to that warehouseman who risked his life to go rescue 3 casks of whiskey.
Well, it's interesting when you go visit the heritage distilleries here, in Kentucky, and you see, I mean, Wild Turkey has some of the oldest rick houses that are still standing. I think every year they go in and they have to analyze and they have to, do a spot check and see if there's any part of the rick houses that are deteriorating enough that they need to restructure it or they need to repair it to keep some of these things standing. It's amazing, but at the same time, I see why they do that. You don't want to lose that. I mean, like you said, look at what Glenfarclas is doing. I mean, they're buying new stills and popping a hole in it and packing just to keep that consistency of flavor. And you got to do the same thing with rick houses as well.
Yeah, it's funny because there's definitely, I know Billy Walker, when we were shooting at Glenallachie, was kind of complaining to us about how tall people stack whiskeys these days because, he said the best, you're always going to get the best from the bottom 3 levels. And that being said, he lives in the real world. Glenallachie has palletized warehouses that are, I think, 14 tall or 13 tall, whatever. I mean, they don't have a choice, but he said the closer you can get to the ground, the more atmosphere you're going to get. The air is going to be more damp, and they want that funkiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with Wild Turkey, you have a lot of different warehouses that have specific flavor profiles that people love. So Wild Turkey geeks like me that really kind of follow these different like barrel picks that come out of these warehouses. There's a certain flavor profile that has to do with that. So, man, God forbid, like warehouse G or A, like collapse, I'd be devastated. I'd be like, where am I going to get my picks now?
The number 1 vaults in Bowmore is the oldest warehouse in Scotland. And part of it's on the shore, and part of it is so deep that it's below sea level. I mean, the waves are literally crashing on a wall above it. Like, that's how damp and funky it is in there. That's
crazy. Have you gone to the Oasis that is the new Macallan distillery yet?
Yeah, the day it opened. By pure dumb luck.
Really?
We had a day off of shooting. It was before we shot the film, but 2 of us, our producer Brad, our cinematographer, and I went there to Scotland to do some preliminary work. And we had a day off, and they said, "Oh, the Macallan's doing their grand openings tomorrow, but they're doing tours today. As long as you don't mind the fact that the tours might have technical problems, because the tour guide has an iPad, and he or she kind of takes you through the tour, and there's all this interactive stuff. It's very Willy Wonka, And so we got the tour the day before they opened to the public. They were open to the public; they just weren't announced. It was like a soft open, and. Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable place. There's no romance to it. It's very high tech, but the other distillery that's a little bit like that is Waterford, and Mark Renier's distillery in Ireland now is.
Yeah, I finally got samples of some of the stuff from Waterford and completely blown away. I mean, it does have like an earthiness to it. You can there's like a raw cereal barley earthiness to it that you can taste, but even at its youthful state that it is now, you could taste some of the. You could almost taste the potential that's in it. It just, I can't wait to try more of it, or till it gets stateside a little bit here, or at least here in Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, there's been 4 expressions released in the U.S. so far. I've had all 4 now, and and I know I think honestly, maybe tomorrow, I think. They wouldn't release them on a Saturday. There's a whole new wave of expressions is about to get released in the U.S.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Then I'm going to definitely keep an eye out for that.
And I've also, in the few shops around here that have it retail, the Waterford, I've seen the prices starting to come down now, which I assume is in anticipation of the next wave coming out, But yeah, it's good stuff, and you can really taste the potential of it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can just tell it's going to be phenomenal whiskey once it gets a little bit up in age here. That's one thing that I've learned, I think, more than anything with trying new distilleries, especially new bourbons, and sometimes they release stuff at 2 years old and it's really not ready yet. But there's a big difference between a horrible 2-year-old whiskey and one that kind of like Waterford, where you can kind of taste the potential, as you mentioned.
I mean, you just know everything that's in it is top shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
From the speed of the distillation to the quality of the cask, to the quality of the barley, to the quality of the Stillman.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I've done it yet again. I think you and I have actually broken my record. I always tell people this is going to be a half an hour, and I always go like 45 minutes. You and I have gone for 4 hours.
We've got an hour just like geeking out.
Yeah, no, and I'm not trying to rush you off. I'm just saying that this is we've gone full length here, and
yeah, I mean, I don't know how busy you are. I could, it's really up to you. It's your show, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean,
if you have any other questions?
I want to save some stuff for your show next week. I'll have to come up with some. Well,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think for our show next week, we'll take more of a deep dive into the film and talk about the whole experience of you making it, and even the story with your crew and everything. I mean, just for me watching the trailer for it, it's just like it's completely immersive. It's just
I'm glad, because I will say what I always tell people is our goal, and I know Alphonse is watching, and he's one of he's our drone pilot and our B camera operator, and our goal creatively, visually, was to make a film that looked like whiskey tastes. We wanted it to be rich and have deep colors and have a sort of sophistication, but not a sort of pretense. There's not over graphics or anything. There's a clear line, if you will, I hope. And I'm so proud of the visual team that did all that stuff. All I did was sit around and do what I'm doing with you right now, just with Jim McEwen.
Yeah, I mean, there's some shots in the trailer of like some old footage of Jim McEwen in the warehouse, and I mean, even those shots, there's just something magical about it. And then the newer shots that you guys had in the warehouses with it literally, just the trailer is like 2 minutes and change, and you literally makes you want to go buy a ticket to go to Scotland like right now. So I can only imagine how the film's going to make me feel.
Well, hopefully you'll get a chance to see the full film before we talk next week.
Yeah, I definitely will. And
I know Erica's going to join us. We're going to do some drams too, right? And
Erica's going to join in. We're going to be drinking some Brooklotti, just to talk about the distillery a little bit, some of the expressions, and talk about the movie. And then hopefully everybody that's watching will have a great opportunity for all of you after the live stream is over for you to get some to buy a ticket and watch the movie for yourself. So,
and I know we're going to have some links for some people to buy the whiskey if they can't get it other places too. So
absolutely. Yep.
I'm going to bring some Octomore. I hope Erica's planning on doing a tasting with an Octomore.
I have a 10.4, and then Erica sent me some of the 11s. So I've been saving those up, so I'll have those ready to go as well. And whatever else she may send, so I can't wait.
I only have the 11 of the 11s. I only have the 11.3. Maybe I'll have to talk to Erica in the meantime.
I think she sent me the 11.1 and the 11.3. I think I have.
And I do have a 10.4. I love 10.4. Love it.
Oh, I love the 10.4. It's so damn good. It's that virgin French oak. Oh, it's unbelievable. French oak is probably one of my favorite maturations in not just bourbon, but in Scotch as well.
Yeah.
So
me too.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks. Have a good Friday evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Grace. It's fun to talk to you.
I refilled this, so. Solange. Hey, before we go here, I'll answer your question there. Yes, the film is not on a streaming site yet. We're still doing one-off events. We're going to be doing that for a few more months. This is what would have been a theatrical run during normal times when we would have been in art house theaters, whiskey festivals, things like that. We will be on DVD. We will be on a streaming site. Probably not till the fourth quarter of this year because we're doing more of these events. We're going to we're doing this thing with Jason next week, but also we're going to do some in Asia as well. So, and in the US and, but this is what's up next. So
just tune in Wednesday, Don, and you'll have a chance to watch it, buddy.
There you go. All right. Thanks, man.
Cheers, man.
Talk to you guys soon.
Greg, I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.